Welcome to Tales from SYL Ranch, where everyone is entitled to my opinion, and I'm Bill Stone. Well, tonight on Tales from SYL Ranch, we have, as always, starting from last week, and probably not next week for reasons that I'll talk about later, we have live call-ins via Skype. We will discuss, among other things, the implications of the Supreme Court of the United States' ruling on McGirt versus Oklahoma, and how this could easily lead to a civil war. And if we have time, we will also discuss how the United States quote-unquote educational system has become nothing more than communist indoctrination that creates violent leftists. Hey, Larry, how are you doing tonight? As this is a live stream, even if you can't get to me on Skype, you can certainly talk with me in chat about anything you want to. You can talk to me about any question, political, social, the virus whose name I cannot mention without it causing YouTube to derank my videos even more than it already does. The ongoing terrorist attacks throughout the United States, systemic racism against African Americans or lack thereof, or even things pertaining to science fiction, fantasy, horror, superheroes, and other genre-related things. I am happy to answer each and every question in as much detail and as truthfully as I can. There are some personal things that I won't get into, but anything else, pretty much fair game. And I will get to as many of my viewers as I possibly can, with the understanding, of course, that I really don't want this to run any longer than about 3 hours, because otherwise it really drains me physically to do it much longer than that. Hey, Super Cruise 63, how you doing? Bada bada boom, bada bada boom. Yes, bing bada boom. Hello, Marshall. How are you doing today? If you would like to call into the show, I am doing it via Skype. So since I don't really want to give out my Skype info in public for fear that eventually down the line somebody will start just spamming me with it, I'd like to do it this way. If you're interested in talking with me directly or having your views heard here on my show, give me an email at callin@sylranch.tv. That scrolls past my lower third, and it is in my description as well. And give me your Skype username or email or whatever you use for it, and I will then Skype you, and then you will be free to talk with me about anything that you want. So again, if you're interested in talking with me directly and having it heard by the rest of my audience, send me an email at callin@sylranch.tv. Give me your Skype username or email, and I will Skype you. And that email address, again, is callin@sylranch.tv, and we will chat. Oh, let's take a glance down here at my... After the cops, they're coming for our superheroes. Oh, they've already been trying that with... what was that stupid Marvel one with the safe space and all those idiots? And then they've also got, what else did they recently do? Oh, yeah, Gotham High. Jay Longbone. She did a stream with somebody where they were reading Gotham High so that you don't have to watch that video. It's very, very damn good. So far, no woke crap on Stargirl. Pretty enjoyable. I really wish I wasn't so damn far behind on that. This coming week, I will explain why towards the end of the show, because it actually has an impact on the show, but I will explain why towards the end of the show. I am going to get caught up on that. I will finally have time to get caught up on some of the shows that I haven't been caught up on. So, yeah, I have lots of stuff on there to catch up on, unfortunately. I have been... getting ready for other things. I just tell you outright, I'm going to be spending the next week. For family reasons, I have to go to a funeral that is within reasonable distance of my family's ranch land. So I'll be out there, I think, all of next week. I plan to do a live stream from out there. I probably won't be able to do any Skype call-ins because my bandwidth is going to be limited. Bandwidth out there is what you can get on Verizon's 4G network, and it's pretty good. It's pretty reliable. But having simultaneous inbound and outbound streams, I don't think is going to be possible with the bandwidth there. I think I'll be able to do outbound, but not doing both of things here. So, Stargirl wears cringy T-shirts. I haven't noticed so much. Last time I was looking at it, I was mostly interested in her costume because I'm just a filthy old man. But I have to like I said, it's one of the things that I'm going to be catching up on is some of those. I have been allowing myself to watch a lot of YouTube reactors who are reacting. Oh, man. Oh, it blows my mind. Millennials reacting to watching Star Wars for the very first time. I mentioned several times on here, one of my guilty pleasures is reactors. People who basically, if they're being genuine, they wear their hearts on their sleeves all the time, and they react to various types of drama and comedies and whatnot. Man, people who've never seen a Star Wars movie before, and then they start in with episode 4, they tend to watch them in released order, and they all go into it thinking, oh, this is an old movie, it's going to be crap, it's going to be horrible, and then they are very pleasantly surprised when it's a good movie, you know. But I'm just kind of like, wait, how do you get to a point at any point in your life? I mean, it's like, for me, it's like not knowing who Superman is, right? I mean, what rock are you living under that you never watched Star Wars? But then I have to remind myself it's been quite a long time, and several generations have come and gone under the bridge, and some of them have never watched Star Wars, so... The main villain, Larry says, is the best actor and character Icicle. I have to catch up on that next week. When you talk to me next week and I'm out at my actual cabin, where I will not have a green screen behind me, you'll be actually seeing some of the building, the living room there, because I'm going to try to take along my microphone and my good cam and set those up so that they look decent, and I'll have the same stuff on, but you'll be seeing the actual interior there, and I'm going to have some time to spend. The temperature out there is going to get around 100. It's amazing because it cools way down to 60-something at night, but during the day it'll zoom right up to 100, and so I'll have some time where I'm just sitting in the house. There is some work that needs to be done out there. There's always things you need to fix and stuff, and it's, for me, kind of an investment thing, and I'll talk more about how some of that comes into direct play in a minute. But for me, it's kind of an investment thing, so I do work out there when I'm out there. But there comes a point where you're just like, okay, I'm just too dead and sweaty from doing all this, and it can be kind of humid because of the foliage and stuff. So, and I'm not that great a shape physically anyway, and I have lower back problems, so I can't do this all at once. So at least spread out over a week. So it'll be fun though. I don't. God, the last time I had an actual vacation was probably 20 years or so ago. You can call the fact that I'm retired now sort of a vacation, but it's sort of not for a lot of other reasons. So going out there for a good week and a half almost, that'll do me just endless amounts of good. Marshall says I should take a high-quality pic of the room so you can use this as a green screen overlay. Then we won't have a clue where you are. I don't think you necessarily want a high-quality pic of the room, but that's an interesting idea. I may take one out there just so that I can put it behind me from time to time and freak people out, Lost Gears, hey, nice to see you here. As a sexual offender of the highest and most disgusting degree, a 4-year-old, how are we just going to know you? I hate you liberals. I'm not sure what you're talking about there. Lost Gears? Who's a sexual offender? Me? Not any 4-year-olds, that's for sure. I got kids. Drop of Truth, hey, nice to see you. It's called Getting Old to Join the Club, yes. Thing is, it's, I'm getting... it's becoming more obvious to me. Let's put it that way. I never expected to say yes, stay young, but not me. Sorry. Okay. I don't know who is the particular guy we're talking about here who is a sex offender of 4-year-olds. That's pretty horrifying. I don't know who it is, so I haven't been paying that much attention. I have another big-ass thing that came up today that actually impacts me more or less directly with respect to that thing that I was talking about with my family's ranch land. And what the hell? I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. So I have a good 10 people on now, so I'll just head straight into it. Again, if you want to call me, if you want to be on the show, email me at call-in at sylranch.tv, and we will give me your Skype username, info, or whatever, and I will Skype you back and put you on. Oh, you're talking about the guy. Oh, you're talking about the guy that I'm going to talk about. Yes, I know who you're talking about. And I'm not going to get into that so much as the implications of what the Supreme Court did. Because today, the Supreme Court ruled that much of Oklahoma isn't exactly a state, as previously thought, and is part of the Creek Indian Nation. Drop Juice says, "Oh, we're talking about the trade TikTok." No, it's we'll talk. I'll tell you in a second. This particular thing where they talked about this might be seen kind of innocuous at first glance, or even good if you're into that sort of thing, because you always have to remember with me, I do always want to preface my remarks by reminding my viewers that I always bring up and try to bring the attention the plight of those on the modern Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota, the number one slum in America consistently, and it is a textbook example of what happens when you do socialism for 150 years. But I have been reading this Supreme Court decision, and I'd basically like to chime in just a little bit. I'd like it if I were a lawyer. If there is a lawyer in my audience who wants to chime in, please feel free. I'd be curious as to your take on it. I'll drop down and have a look at my chat here in just half a second as I get through this. It's tough to slog through. I've been trying to slog through the entire decision. Here's the deal. The petitioner, Jimsy McGirt, he was convicted by an Oklahoma state court for 3 very serious sexual offenses, and that's where Lost Gears is talking about being a 4-year-old. I think mostly just to get out of it. He was arguing that the state of Oklahoma lacked jurisdiction to prosecute him because he is an enrolled member of the Seminole Nation. It's a Native American tribe, and the crimes took place on the Creek Reservation, and so what he wants is a new trial, which he contends has to take place in a federal court. Well, the Supreme Court upheld this idea. They're going to send it back for a new trial, based on the fact that there was an 1833 treaty that was set aside about half of Oklahoma as a permanent home to the whole Creek Nation of Indians. And this decision hinged on the fact that Congress never officially annulled the treaty when the state was established. And since Congress promised the land to the Indians in perpetuity without formally abandoning this treaty, the land is still theirs, and it would take an act of Congress to make it something otherwise. Oh boy. The implications for this goes way beyond just Oklahoma. Indeed, as this video says, this is the one that this show was made for. I guarantee you that I have better information than any other talking head that you're going to be hearing regarding this issue, because most of the talking heads are almost exclusively provincial urbanites who believe that the land that they insultingly call flyover country is just empty, so why not, quote, give it back to the Indians, end quote. So please don't pay attention to the usual talking heads. Listen to someone like me who lives in flyover country and has land that is absolutely directly, potentially anyway, affected by this. And here's how. By treaty, most of the area, all of the area that you're looking at here, would constitute what's called the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota Nation. This is sort of the correct name for the Sioux. The Sioux are not really what they call themselves. Sioux is an Ojibwa name. It's an epithet. It means lower than a snake's belly. Probably tells you who is getting along with whom. But the Sioux are actually made up of multiple tribes, the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, Ogallala to some extent. But there's a link to them. They have a website about this, their nation. There's a link to it below. As far as I know, none of the treaties represented by these various colors here were ever annulled prior to the states of Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, and Wyoming becoming states. And so a lot of people might just say, well, so what? It's just a bunch of ignorant, hayseed Trump voters who are getting in the way of the left's new communist utopia. Good riddance. Well, you couldn't be more wrong, because among other things in this land is the area of Omaha, Nebraska, a metro area of about 1 million people. And it includes numerous smaller cities, all totaling, I guess, about 2.5 million people. And it also includes a lot of ranch and farmland that keeps urbanites very fat and happy. And not only that, there are hundreds of thousands of acres of land throughout the U.S. that belong to the natives by treaty. And this would include, by the way, rather enormous parts of California. However, I can't really speak about those other areas. I can talk about this one, because not only does it include those cities and farms, it also includes my family's ranch land, where I'll be starting tomorrow night. Depending on how all this shakes out, the Supreme Court has set the stage for a civil war. Millions of people will not stand by while their homes, businesses, farms, and ranches are handed over to others, even if those people hold a valid treaty. The people currently holding those properties have had it for 100 to 150 years or more, and are far more firmly entrenched than the Native Americans actually were. In point of fact, the Native Americans, and I say this as someone with the utmost respect for what they had to go through, Native Americans are over-romanticized. There is no such thing as a noble savage. The Native Americans, if you just look at Lewis and Clark journals, right, from when they made the voyage of discovery throughout the, to find the Pacific Ocean from the Missouri River, they would get to this part of the country and discover that, hey, there's maybe a dozen or so of these tribes who were at peace with each other, because they were each discrete individual, tribes. And they were generally, extended family units and things like that. But they were each individual tribes, and they'd be at peace with about 12 of them, but then warring with another 20. And the ones that were at peace with each other were warring with different ones that were at peace with some of the other ones. They were never all that, they were never what they're romanticized to be. They stole land from each other all the time, and they tended to move from the east to the west to some extent as pressure from colonial expansion moved in, but also just because they tended to fight with each other over territory. And when you have small groups like that, sometimes you can get mates to come in and keep your gene pool good, just by making deals with other tribes, and sometimes you win and you stole women. And if you look to some of the more, and I know because in 2004 I considered briefly running for the United States Senate from South Dakota, where I lived and where I was born, on the Libertarian ticket. And you can't win running on a Libertarian ticket. It's just not possible. So I said, hey, why don't I lose by losing with the one demographic that nobody ever cares two fracks about, and that's the Native American one. So I said to myself, if you're going to run, just do nothing but stump on the Indian reservations. There are several in South Dakota, and they're all in bad shape. And every 4 years, they have some idiot walking through who says, oh, yes, everything's going to be different with me in office, and then they're promptly forgotten. They don't believe it for a nanosecond either. But I thought, hell, just do it nothing but there. Don't go anywhere else. And in fact, I started learning the Lakota language, because that's kind of an important tradition to them. Things made it impossible for me to be able to do that. Probably a good thing, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure I would have wanted to put in that much effort just to lose. Although if you are from the Libertarian Party in South Dakota, for God's sake, do that. You can't win. Don't bother even trying. Lose to the demographic that nobody else cares about. Pull votes away, because they know that nobody gives a crap about them. Go in there on the res and act like you do. Say, I will make things better, and mean it. But in any case, we have what is, if you take all of this stuff going on with, the people who have been living here for 100, 150 years, quite a lot of them who have a significant foothold on this territory. And then you add in the fact that the left has been lurching us toward a civil war for the last straight 4 years. The Supreme Court couldn't have set things up better for a civil war if they'd tried. And in all honesty, I don't think they were trying. I think they're just ignorant provincial urbanites who think that this is all just empty land, so why not give it back to the Indians? Now, I hear you saying, but Bill, you incredible hypocrite, I hear you saying. On the one hand, you say that something needs to be done about the Pine Ridge and its poverty, and on the other, you're saying you're speaking out against keeping treaties that have been broken for centuries. Yes, I am totally aware of the dichotomy, and here's where it falls down for me. Pragmatism. I cannot deny that tens of millions of non-natives would be impacted and that they will not stand for having the homes and businesses turned over to others. That is just a way to start a civil war. The way to solve the problem on the Pine Ridge is to stop the socialist policies that were created by the federal government that put them in permanent destitution to begin with. The Pine Ridge is a perfect example of what happens when you have socialism for 150 years. It crushes your spirit and turns you into, well, this. This is socialism in action. This is what happens if we get socialism throughout the United States. In 150 years or less, we'll all be looking like that. But I don't think that the way to solve this problem is by opening the door to a civil war all over the United States. There is an enormous amount of real estate involved here, just an enormous amount. And not just in these states. I happen to live in Nebraska, right over here. And Omaha is within this yellow area here. My family ranch land is about up in there-ish. And then, the Black Hills, they have complained for many years that the Black Hills is being desecrated. Thing is, the Black Hills right now is a giant tourist trap from one end to the next. If you were going to kick everybody out, that would be a problem. So I'm also going to say something that my Native American friends may find a bit controversial, but it's something that my father once said, and at this point I kind of have to agree with him. The worst thing that ever happened to Native Americans is that they were put on reservations in the first place. If, like every other conquered people throughout history on every part of the planet, they had simply been told, you have been now conquered, so integrate with the people who conquered you. If that had happened, there would not be a single poor person on the Pine Ridge today. There wouldn't even be a Pine Ridge. They'd just be a people who are indistinguishable from every other ethnic group that's running around the U.S. But what actually happened directly led to the poverty on the Pine Ridge and now the potential civil war that we potentially face with this SCOTUS ruling. And no doubt, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, always referred to as Red Cortez on this show because it fits, and Ilhan Omar and the rest of their socialist squad are just screaming orgasmically at this ruling. And no doubt leftists in general are orgasmic at the prospect of being rid of those pesky red states that get in the way of their impossible communist utopia. What they don't understand is what a modern civil war will look like. Now, I was worried, really worried until just today, that I'd be fighting a civil war based on my political ideology. Now I'm worried I'm going to be fighting it based on geography. And here's a little secret, by the way, about civil wars. You don't get to remain neutral. Circumstance will force you to pick a side, and it may be the side you don't want to be on. It may be a side that can see your friends and family killed because they are on the other side. But that's what this SCOTUS has brought us. So I hope you're happy, you insipid bunch of provincial urbanites on the Supreme Court, you idiot leftists. There's my rant. Let me take a look back here into my chat. Lots of things to look back to. Yay, awesome. Am I buffering? Hope I'm not buffering to everybody and it's just one person. Well, let's see. Marshall says, hey, there goes California's 50-plus electoral votes. Yes. And Oregon and Washington. Yes. 5 nations were put in Oklahoma. That's the yup. Supercruise 63 says, I'm 57 in 10 days and I still chase women. Problem is, they're getting harder to catch. Well, I've kind of found it 55 coming up, I guess just 55 and a half. I don't know. These days you count the half years again. Count them when you're young, count them when you're older because you don't want to get closer and closer to that next one. I found that basically your field narrows rather dramatically. You get women who have never been married, and usually they have like 9 million tattoos and 40, piercings, and they're kind of messed up some way, and you just don't want to touch them. You have sex with them, but don't have a relationship with them. And then you get women who have been, were married, but are so seriously damaged from, emotionally from some kind of bad relationship that my days of white knighting are over. I just no, I ain't going to touch that with a 10-meter cattle prod. So the pics looked like the modern version of the Great Depression. Well, this is everyday life in the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. To this day, right now, if you walked out there, you'd see this or worse. Right now, they're out there frying because a lot of them live in these tin shanties that don't have any air conditioning. Best they could do is the smashed open windows, so it's pretty horrifying out there. That's what socialism does when you do it for 150 years. That is socialism right there. That is 150 years worth of socialism. You don't solve that by creating a situation where you might have a civil war. You solve that by getting rid of the socialist programs that killed them like that. Well, good night, Lost Gears. I hope you maybe get back later. Dammer Smith, nope, still looking for a lawyer on this new ruling. Yeah, you and me both. I'd love to have one. Pro tip, chase older women. Yeah. Golf carts, Lost Gears. It's stupid as hell. What is that going to do for him anyway? Does he really think because of that fact they're going to let him go? Oh, of course not. This was just a tactic on his part. It's just a tactic that backfired on everybody. It backfired on everyone. Thanks, Lost Gears. I'm glad. Thank you very much for subbing. Appreciate it. Hey, however you came across me, always feel free to, share me on social media any way that you want to. I'm at SYL Tales on Twitter. I have a page on Facebook. It's Tales SYL Ranch, I think it is, but you can find me on Facebook. Let's see. Dr. 2 says, U.S. flyover country is very beautiful. The Durangos on the coast don't know what they're missing. I tend to agree, but then I live here. I visited New York City once. Don't want to visit it again because I have some very fond memories of that by virtue of being able to go out at that time. That was when you could still go out to the Statue of Liberty and go up to the top into the Crown. And I don't want to ruin those memories. I have, however, lived for about 10 years in Chicagoland, so I know what it's like to live in a large metro area as well. But, I live in Lincoln, Nebraska. It's a city of about 344,000 people, 40-ish, 340-ish when you count our suburbs. And then Omaha is only an hour away, less than an hour away these days, about half an hour. And that's 1 million people. And again, they would be part of this Lakota Nation. 1 million people. They want the Black Hills back too. Black Hills is a giant tourist trap these days. It's a giant tourist trap. It's not just Mount Rushmore. And by the way, there's an amazing, really amazing, much larger in progress sculpture called the Crazy Horse Memorial. It is something like 4 times larger than Mount Rushmore, and unlike Mount Rushmore, it will be completed. Mount Rushmore was never completed. It was federally run, and they just ran out of money and said, okay, call it done. But it's actually supposed to be full busts, front and back, of those presidents. And you can see it, too. You can see it when you see the beginning of Washington's, vest and his coat there, and then it just sort of disappears. That was supposed to be all the way down with his arms. They just never finished it. But the Crazy Horse Memorial, that someday will be finished. It is run entirely by private donations. It is a libertarian's paradise, like myself. When it comes to something like that, it's made a lot of progress in my lifetime. I will not live to see it completed. My children, maybe my grandchildren, but it's made far more progress in my lifetime than I ever expected to see. And then there are all kinds of caves. There's an enormous series of cave structures in there. I really suggest the Jewel Cave one. That's really cool. If you're physically svelte enough and you're not too worried about having to be in small places. They have a Spelunkers tour that you can go on that takes you through the original opening. You have to wear a hat with a thing on it and crawl through things. I'm no longer in a position where I can. When I was much, much younger and a teenager, I wish now that I'd gone, but I didn't. I was too scared, and I wish I could because I can't. And they have other privately owned caves. They have, all kinds of the usual tourist junk with, campgrounds and stuff like that, and trail horses. And if you want to, you can get your own horse and go on trails. And every year, it's not quite in the Black Hills, but it fuels a lot of tourism. Every year in Sturgis, South Dakota, is the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally. That's just barely outside of the Black Hills itself, but it draws something like 100,000 or 150,000 motorcyclists, bikers every year. It's, as I've said in a couple of other times, if they ever make marijuana legal in South Dakota, I am going to petition my family to allow me to do one crop out on that ranch land, take it into Wall, South Dakota, right off of I-90, another giant tourist trap, and put up a tent, sell my crop, one crop, I'm done. I'm rich, set for life. But it's a big tourist trap all the way through the hills there. Just a ton and a ton and a ton of tourist trap stuff. Turning it over to someone else's management would be problematic, I think. Drop 2 says, country folks worldwide are very similar, good, down-to-earth, honest people. Well, I like to think so. I've certainly known lots of jerks. Demra Smith, I see you. It is, excuse me. Demra says it is already a civil war, the most civil of civil wars in history. Sorry, I coughed twice. Well, so far, I don't think it's necessarily going to stay that way at all. Lost Gears says, I felt like the most recent BLM was going down has been the catalyst for everything that has been going on lately. If you've caught some of my other stuff, I have a couple of streams out there. One when I was stupid and did 8 freaking hours on it. But when there has been particularly bad violent attacks of some kind or another, I sometimes will get on a stream and just show the videos because I don't pay attention to the news, because nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. It doesn't matter where you're getting your news from. They can't get the facts right even when they're trying, and they don't try very much anymore. I always listen to first responder frequencies. You can find links to first responder frequencies in an application for your handheld that will allow you to do that, because you'll learn a lot more about what's actually going on in the world by listening to first responder frequencies. And I also watch a lot of citizen journalism feeds, live streams as they come in off of YouTube, because that'll tell you a lot more about what's going on the ground without filtering it through a talking head who half the time is just sitting there free associating, about what they're seeing. And it doesn't matter. Their free association is meaningless. It's like me when I free associate about it. It's meaningless. So once in a while I've gotten on and done that. The last time I did it was 8 hours long. I will never do an 8-hour long stream ever again. I was dead after that was finished. But I do sometimes go on and do those from time to time. And if you listen to first responder frequencies, it's gotten a little better the last couple of weeks. But for a long time there, it was just nothing but somewhere in the United States, someplace, there was some sort of violence going down. Somewhere. It was really widespread. It's gotten a little better. Don't know if it'll stay that way. Kind of doubt it. But it has gotten better with Black Lives Matter stuff going on. Marshall says he thinks it's going to get hotter. It's a Democrat. Gosh, where the heck am I? I'm sorry. It's Democrat utopia. I don't think it's a utopia of any kind. Now they're just jumping everything else, getting into it. Yeah, that virus plus impeachment plus BLM plus election year. Yes, very much so. Lost Gears says plandemic. I don't know it's necessarily planned, the pandemic. I think you can look at something very interesting that I believe Marshall brought to my attention, which was while they were busy locking down their cities in China, they were still allowing international travel. That's kind of weird. You think you'd shut that off. But apparently they didn't care if the virus got out. They just wanted to control it internally. I don't know necessarily there's any planning going on there. But I think it's certainly opportunism. You can certainly make a case for opportunism. Absolutely. Tearing down the statues. Yes, the tearing down the statues is still ongoing. The ones that they tear down are just astonishing because they have nothing to do with racism. Although it should tell you something, the state of education, which I'll talk about if I get a minute. I'll also talk about some educational stuff. But the state of education is such that in the city of Lincoln, Nebraska, 340,000-ish people, recent survey taken, 70% of respondents to the survey did not know for whom the city of Lincoln is named. Tells you a lot about education right there. And the people killing each other, yup, nothing but pointless chaos, totally agree. Mainstream media is reawakening the scare tactics of MERS, SARS, get this, bubonic plague. Well, I don't know what to make of the bubonic plague stuff. You always worry about anything coming out of China anymore. Buffering was off and on, good for now. Glad to know that. I never know when it's happening for everyone or if it's just happening for a single individual. I hope I've got all my, sort of bandwidth eating stuff turned down right now. Deborah Smith, SCOTUS-gate will solve all problems. 50 years of conservative rule coming in hot. No, I don't think so. They just gave us a ruling that could lead to civil war. I don't know. We'll have to see. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. It could very well be very, very nasty out there because of what they did today. Larry says MGTOW. Well, I sometimes talk about MGTOW stuff. It's not my main thing, and I don't get into it nearly as much as a lot of people do with respect to what I think about it. But I lean that direction sometimes, but that's largely because of the state of family law. It very much puts a man at a significant disadvantage. I do not recommend that a man get married this day and age. I think it puts you at too much of a financial risk, more than anything else, a financial risk. Drop 2 says, when my dad went to Hanoi to build housing there, he was warned of bubonic plague. That was in the 80s. Yeah, I mean, they have it somewhere at some point. I mean, you get, I've forgotten where I heard about it. One of Southern California's largest cities have some outbreak of bubonic plague. It's around. It sounds real scary because, hey, bubonic plague is what, killed half of Europe or more. It sounds real scary, but we see it from time to time, and it's not necessarily horrible. Hey, Jeanette, good evening yourself. Deborah Smith, international crime on the reservations is the plague too. Hey, I don't know about that much, at least not the reses that I'm familiar with, certainly not the Pine Ridge, where there's a lot of international crime. Pine Ridge, I just see, you go through there and you just see poverty. They have no money. Alcoholism is incredibly high. The incidence of fetal alcohol syndrome is above 90%. Which means, women are drinking while they're pregnant and stuff. They don't have any money. They can buy the booze and that's about it. That's mostly what I see there. And there's ways to get rid of this problem. There's ways to get rid of this problem that don't involve turning all of this land back over, all of this freaking land. You may not know, but that's an enormous area. I would guess that if you were going to stick it all together, that's roughly the area of California. It doesn't look it if you're not familiar with those particular states, but that chunk there in the yellow and orange and red is probably the size of California. That is an enormous piece of land, and that's just the one that's near me, that impacts me personally. It's everywhere across the United States. There are tons and tons of places like this where this would apply. Movement is full of nothing but Antifa family incels. I'm not sure which movement you're talking about. MGTOW? I don't agree with that necessarily. I think, honestly, you can make a case that, it is family law is heavily biased against men, and it puts you at a severe disadvantage to be married. You can do the same things. You can have kids and all that without getting married and without placing yourself into an extreme position of vulnerability financially. For me, that's pretty much the long and the short of it is the financial issues. Having live through that. Time for SCOTUS date to accelerate. It's happening very soon. C.J. Roberts is the unnamed actor in Spygate. Who knows? Who knows? I never know how to deal with who's who in various things that are going on, or even how necessarily incredibly serious to take them. I would say that the biggest thing that you can tell is that the press is very, very activist against Trump, understanding that I am a libertarian, but I get caught in the crossfire with conservatives because people who are on the left have just gone that plain insane. It used to be, that I had something in common with both sides, and they would tolerate me, each of them, because they would say, well, you got enough in common with me over here, you got enough in common with me over there, we'll tolerate you, libertarian. Not anymore. God, I'm in a position sometimes of having to defend Trump, which I don't like finding myself in, but that's just because the left has gone completely bat crap crazy. And they are, in my opinion, the enemy of civilization itself at this point. The left has gone nuts, and I can't have anything in common with them anymore. So I get caught in the crossfire with that all the time. But the main thing I can see is that the press is trying to, make public opinion such that everything about Trump is negative. I've often thought if he really wanted to get something done, he should say he wants to do the exact opposite of what he really wants to do. Have the press come down and the Democrats come down on him real hard, and then say, okay, I've changed my mind. I want to do this other thing. Leave him nowhere to go. Clearly the press is trying to, get him, voted out. And, obviously the Democratic Party is right behind him. The press is printing anything the Democratic Party says, or reporting anything the Democratic Party says, without bothering to even think about being impartial about it. I from time to time, I did it a couple of weeks ago. It wasn't my greatest debunking in the world, but I will sometimes take a viewer challenge to debunk the press, where I'll take any article from any news source. Kind of needs to be print for it to work out well on my show, but I can show in about 30 minutes, more than that when I'm explaining it. But if I'm doing something, I can show in about 30 minutes that one of three things is true. Either the event being reported never happened, that the event being reported didn't happen as reported, or that when you strip away the slick interface, unrelated filler, the opinions, the emotionally loaded language, you wind up with a few sentences of actual facts at best. Nothing you see in the press is real. Nothing. Dropper Twos, what is your opinion of the mainstream media to promote polyamory? I don't know. That part of it for me is so far off my radar. I'm too busy going, okay, here we are. Because see, what happens when I do those debunkings is you're seeing what goes on in my head automatically. For more than 30 years now, I guess it's closer to 30 some years, I have made a very masochistic hobby of debunking the press, such that my methods are now constantly going on in my head anytime I see any kind of article or news story. My criticism is being turned on, and I'm like, okay, this is emotionally loaded, that's filler, this is opinion, okay, wait, they're giving us unnamed sources close to somebody or other, okay, just throw it out. Anytime you see a news article that says unnamed sources or sources close to thee, throw it out. It used to be with journalism, if you had any integrity, you would find 3 named sources willing to go on the record. And if you didn't have that, you didn't run the story. Now they'll run anything. And you don't know who these unnamed sources are, so throw the article out. It no longer has any meaning. It's like the stuff going on with the Russians sending out bounties. The source for that, ultimately, was the New York Times. I tracked it down. And the New York Times was using unnamed sources. Throw it out. It's probably not real. The unnamed sources could be spies of some kind. Who knows, By the way, this is a call-in, so if you want to call in to me, please. I'm using Skype for this right now. You can email me at callin@sylranch.tv. And if you give me your username, and let me check and see if I've got anything here. If you want to give me your username or email address or whatever you use for Skype, I will call you back so that I don't have my Skype information out there for everybody in the world to see and calling me in the middle of the night and, curse me out. But let's see. 9 SCO. Oh, geez. All right. I got a bunch of them here. 9 SCOTUS members, 5 Jesuits, and 4 of those we can't discuss. I don't know. Lost gears, drink some water. Yes, I have to always. These streams take it out of me physically, and if I don't drink, then I start. One of my kids has a condition. It's gotten better since she's gotten older, but if your voice is dry at all, it really drives her insane. It's not exactly super hearing, but there's certain things, swallowing, chewing, things like that, just drove her nuts when she was growing up. Live streams are we watch Keyed US, and immediately that there are at least 2 different groups involved from day one, and no one believes us. Now they do. Yeah. The scanners have been they've been decreasing in terms of the amount and that we're seeing them. By the same token, it's starting to become kind of normal, and so it's not alerting me as frequently as it used to. I have to kind of go out and look, but I was surprised at how uneventful that 4th of July was. I have to wonder if that isn't because of the speech that Trump made at Mount Rushmore. By the way, I generally can't stand to listen to Trump's speeches, especially when he's stumping. I can't stand. It is just nothing but sound bites. But he did a very, very presidential speech when he was basically walking through and explaining things that people are no longer taught in school about these historical figures. Really good. I wished, frankly, that somebody with the kind of command of language and the charisma and the stature that, like, Ronald Reagan had said that speech. Because when Trump does it, it's a little bit on the boring side. But it was a good speech. It was a very good speech in that respect, and I liked watching it very much. Yes, you're way ahead of me. Is Gislani Maxwell a dead woman? Or do I see a dead man switch here? I can only say that virus looks like a really good possibility for her to die from. Live streams, which we watched, keyed us in immediately that there were at least 2 different groups involved from day one, and no one believed us. Now they do. Yeah, there were 2 different groups. I mean, there's 2 different sets of people here, and the problem is that you had generally peaceful, not every day, but generally peaceful protests, and then you got nightfall, and everybody went crazy. The problem is it was impossible for you to discern between them. Now we're having some people, I'm told, who have quit Black Lives Matters because it has been taken over by leftists. Yay, yay, yay. The more people we can have like that, the better. We need peaceful protesting. We don't need rioting, looting, etc. So good for that. City of Lincoln is named after a car, silly. Yeah. It's named after Link on the Mod Squad. Yeah. I don't know. They just didn't know. And you love that show. Yeah, Mod Squad was interesting. Demmer Smith, hey, have hope the judges are going down. If you don't believe me, just watch the show that goes down in the next few months. Well, in order to take a federal judge down from the Supreme Court, they have to be impeached. Fat chance of that happening. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans are going to have the votes to impeach any Supreme Court justice. You're just going to have to wait for, like, Ginsburg to, die and things like that. And she's never going to stand down. She's waiting around to hope for another Democratic president. I can't tell if she's got some dementia starting yet or not, but, she's never leaving. She'll either die there or she won't. Let's see. Hope the judges are going down next. I thought it was the Bruce Lee. Damn. Demmer Smith, I know a lot in these networks target reservation land for trafficking their goods and avoiding criminal prosecution. I don't know. Maybe some, but I haven't ever seen it. I haven't ever seen it being down on the Pine Ridge. That's for sure. Not on the Pine Ridge. The Pine Ridge is just so far off the beaten path. It's not something where you can just get to it from the interstate. You got to drive through a whole lot of, well, this Dakota Badlands to get there, to get to the Pine Ridge. I don't see it there. Maybe there's some where it's more useful to do that sort of thing, but I've never seen it in either of any of the South Dakota ones, that's for sure. Let's see. Demmer Smith's North Dakota reservations and New Mexican reservations near the borders are the human trafficking pipelines. I did not know anything about that. So, again, just haven't seen it in South Dakota. Drop 2 says, I have a friend in Little Canada, Minnesota, and he visits the Indian-owned casinos about once a month. He says the Indians there have so much more money that they have problems with alcoholism, have so much money they have problems with alcoholism and depression. It might be true. I don't know. Again, the thing about Pine Ridge and any of South Dakota's Indian reservations is they're way, way off the beaten track. If they were anywhere closer to Interstate 90, which is the huge thoroughfare, everybody goes through Interstate 90 almost in order to get to the Black Hills, Mount Rushmore, etc. If they were anywhere close to the interstate, they could make money doing that. But they're not. They're so far, Pine Ridge in particular, so far south of the interstate through terrain like this. 2-lane roads, sometimes turning into gravel. It's just too far out for them to be able to do anything meaningful like that. Dammer Smith, casinos are full of corruption, money laundering, drug trafficking. You name the crime, it has its teeth in a tribal casino system. Can't speak to that directly. Wouldn't be shocked. I mean, that's always the sort of thing you see along with gambling. Who reads printed news or printed anything anymore? Well, not too many people read it, unfortunately. And if I get to it, I may talk about something about education and how poor it is and why people are now dependent on a press that is not telling the truth about any damn thing. They can't read. That's the biggest problem. They're watching press reports on, the video news, and they're no better. But when I debunk stuff, I like to do it with something that is print related, just because it's easier for me to do it, right here in front of the camera. Ilhan Abdul Omar married her biological brother so she could get a green card. Is that true? If so, how is it legal? Yeah, Dammer Smith, the Omar scandal is true. It certainly seems to be, yes. Yeah, Dammer Smith, lobotomized Americans still watch CNN. Given the time, I will probably get to talking about education. Education was going to be my original subject. And then this thing with the Supreme Court and what the precedent that they have now set by doing this, which is shockingly huge, that became my major focus because it sort of directly impacts me. And not that education doesn't, but I have a whole other piece of that I've also written out, like I did my monologue at the beginning. Again, if you want to be on the show, feel free to send me send to the email, call in at syolranch.tv and give me your Skype information. I'll call you back and let you be heard right here, right now. Lobotomy, yeah. Ghislaine Maxwell didn't kill herself next week. Yeah, there's a meme rolling around, and I don't know if I've got a copy of it. I may in my downloads here. I can't really pick it up, put it up. No, I don't have it. But yeah, it's a list of ways that you think she's going to die. 9 of them being suicide, 1 of them being that virus whose name I can't say, and the very high end, the one that you could bet 1,000,000 to 1 odds, is that the press will admit that she was murdered. But it's stuff like suicide by hanging, suicide by strangling, suicide by bullets to the back of the head. I don't know. I mean, I would just be, she knows too much. I would be surprised if she made it to trial. I really would. Dropper says you laughed heartily when they tore down the Albert Pike statue in Washington, D.C. The Freemasons were apoplectic. Don't know about that one particularly. Didn't follow that. It's more interested in stuff they were doing to, people like Jefferson and Washington and things like that. And again, understanding that people in my own city don't know for whom Lincoln, Nebraska is named. Ghislaine Maxwell's getting ready to name 5 big names. Will she make it? I doubt it. I'd be shocked if she made it. Bruce Lee was a phony Bruce Lee. Yeah. Watch the film Casino for Truth. Yeah. Deborah Smith, stay hopeful. It's seems very dire right now, but it's going to get better for everyone. Well, we hope so. Depends. It just depends what, because this stupid thing that the SCOTUS has done is going to throw a lot of stuff into chaos. A lot of stuff into chaos. Stuff that Congress will have to address. And if they're going to address it, I don't know how you address it. The liberals will be wanting to, the leftists will be wanting to say, yes, give this land all back to the Indians. The Democratic Party might well go along with it because a lot of this area that they see, at least here, is red states. If they could be rid of us for votes, that'd be wonderful. By the same token, you get California. It would be breaking California up. I don't know. It's either dissolve, just say we're dissolving all these treaties that we never really paid any attention to anyway, or you do it. I don't know which. What SCOTUS has done is set a very, very bad precedent. Is what they've done. How it will shake out, I don't know. Drop Truth says, double speak. It's not gambling. It's with the mafia. Crime connotation is now gaming. Fun for the whole family. Yes. Larry, you were born and raised in Oklahoma. Well, then you probably know more about the situation and how much of the state has just sort of been carved out than I do there. I can only speak to what the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota have been lobbying for some time. Which is something the size of California over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different states. So, Supergrid 63. If she has any dirt on the Clintons, she's a goner. Yeah, if she has any dirt on Prince Andrew, which seems like a possibility, she's probably a goner. Yeah. Deborah Smith says the Swamp Thing was deeper than Trump could even imagine, but we will win long term. I was in IT for 40 years. The swamp is far, far deeper than you could possibly imagine. And I know from doing IT work just how deep it is. I should say I know how deep the IT side of it is. And it's much, much worse than you can imagine. Put it this way. If I were ever elected president, and those of you watching me at the NSA know I'm not going to do this. If I were ever elected president, I would evacuate the data center in Utah that the NSA has, where they have enough storage. My colleagues calculate that they have enough storage and have been growing it for a decade or so to be able to record every single last thing that you ever do on the internet. And I know from having worked in places that I unfortunately no longer under an NDA for, that they have in data centers, particularly places like Google, Facebook, ISPs, the large ones, they have what are called NSA cages. Now these are caged off with chain link fence and other things and high security stuff, areas where all of the traffic in and out of that data center for Google, Facebook, Twitter, etc., name your place, gets captured and sent to this Utah data center. Now, they do what's called a data mining there. They don't sit there and they look at all its data as it's coming in. They pull off the stuff that belongs to me, and they've got it filed away someplace. And if at any time they want to say, hey, tell me all about Bill Stone, well, they can pull down everything that I've ever done since they started monitoring this, which was shortly after 9/11. If I were elected president, I would order that site evacuated, the area around it evacuated, and then I would lob a tactical nuke into it. And then I would lobby for a amendment to the Constitution that says we will lob a tactical nuke in there every 200 years, just as a warning to future generations what a free society will never build. It is way, way worse than you think it is. Anything that you ever hear about, it's way worse. The stuff that they did with getting dirt on Donald Trump, it's way worse because they have access to all of that information about him. All of it. Let's start a rumor that Nancy Pelosi has dirt on the Clintons and she's ready to talk. Yeah, that's going to happen. Blazer one saying Ghislaine Maxwell had an affair with Bill Clinton. Who the hell knows? Bill Clinton screwed just about anything that would move. I mean, that was the thing, right? Living through that as I did. What really surprised me was this, right? Okay, here you have JFK. He's president of the United States. One of his mistresses was Marilyn Monroe, right? Okay, this I understand. But then they get Bill Clinton, and his mistresses were anybody that would stand still for 5 minutes, and unfortunately included a lowly unpaid intern whose life was destroyed. And I'm sorry, she was fine, but she wasn't Marilyn Monroe. I'm like, can't this president get better women than that? At least with JFK, you could say, oh, some class there. You got Marilyn Monroe. Just all utterly ridiculous, I thought. Drop Truth says Washington, D.C. is actually built on a swamp. How apt. Donated by John Carroll, a Jesuit. Demar Smith said, if Obama is impeached retroactively, yes, we can do that in spring 2021, then every policy he made is moot, and every swamp creature he put in office will immediately be rejected from office. Hey, look. James Comey went before the Senate, and he told them, he testified before the Senate, a Republican Senate, that he had leaked notes that he had taken while talking to President Trump to the press with the expressed intent of hoping that a special prosecutor would be created. He testified to this, okay? That's treason. That's out and out, outright treason. These notes were not his. He took them while he was head of the FBI. They belonged to the FBI. Now, I know from having done government work that if I go out and I leak stuff that I had done while I was on government work, I'm off in a federal prison like that. But he actually testified in front of the Senate that he had done that. I was just flabbergasted. I'm watching it going, wait, what the hell? He must know where every single one of their bodies are buried, because if it had been me, I was living in Iowa at the time. If it had been me, Senator Stone, libertarian from Iowa, I would have said, Mr. Comey, I want to get this straight. You just testified that you took government-owned and classified material and you leaked it to the press. Is that correct? That's correct, Senator. Well, in that case, Mr. Comey, I'm afraid, James Comey, that you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. You have right to have one during questioning. If you can't afford an attorney, one will be provided to you free of charge. The charges are treason and violation of the Espionage Act. Do you understand your rights as I have explained them to you? And when he said yes, I would have said, Sergeant at Arms, please take Mr. Comey into custody, deliver him to the federal marshals, have them bound and gag him, because who knows who he could give hand gestures to on the way. You will put him in irons and chains and gag him and take him to the nearest extremely secluded, because the guy was testifying that he'd violated the law, that he was a traitor. And what did they do? They let him go. I couldn't believe it when I was watching. I was like, what the frack? He must know where every single one of their bodies is buried. He's got to know the dirt on all of those guys, because if it had been me, he wouldn't have made it out of that hearing without being arrested. I would have done it myself as an officer of the court by virtue of being a senator. So I don't think they're going to retroactively impeach anybody. If you can't get Comey when he says that he's just committed treason, you lack the will. It's just that simple. Can we get Maxine Waters too? No. Let's see. Blazer 101. Deep State is getting ready to release Trump's taxes. If they do that, Bill, is Trump's presidency over? I don't know. The thing about it is when you get into somebody's taxes who's a billionaire, right, you're getting into taxes that are incredibly, incredibly complex. And the thing is that I wouldn't give them out either. If I was a billionaire, I would not give out my taxes either, because it's too easy for the press to grab onto some really small piece of it and make a giant thing out of it, when in fact all that happened was it was one line in a 4,000-page thing. The press doesn't understand complex things like that. It would take, he has teams of guys, that just, or people that do nothing but do his taxes. And he spends mountains of dough just to pay for these guys to do this stuff for him. So you let that stuff get out, and I don't know that it's necessarily the end of his presidency, but it's certainly fodder for, a press that is absolutely out to get him. It could make him look bad just because they can grab onto 1 or 3 lines here and there, totally out of context, which they do with him all the time anyway. This is one of those places I tend to end up, defending Trump, which is, the press will take things out of context. They will only show you little blips of things in footage that if you saw the entire thing, you'd discover that he said something totally different than what he did. And so they'd take that stuff out of context, and it would be terrible. I would never show them. I would fight tooth and nail not to give my taxes out in an atmosphere like that. Superguru63 says, good idea. Remind me of I love our friends down under. Yep. Yes, always have to say thank you very much, Drop of Truth, for watching. Drop of Truth is from the wonderful place of Australia, down under. So thank you very much for watching me. You would have to nuke the Utah data center, just turn off its water supply and it will fry. Yes, but I'd want to nuke it. I would want to nuke it and nuke it and nuke it and nuke it so that particular place is radioactive for all time. So that everyone from this moment on would know, you never do this. You never build this in a free society. Never. How did Bill Clinton deflect from his White House indiscretions? He promoted a war. It's been suggested that Monica Lewinsky was Mossad. I don't think that's anything. It's just that the press, that's one of the reasons. I have a good friend who often is on my stream here, who voted for Trump, not because he particularly liked Trump, but because he knew that the press would be on him. Whereas if you voted for Hillary, you knew that they would let her get away with murder. Which may have happened. Who the hell knows? But in any case, if, with Clinton, all he had to do is he just had a very sympathetic press. That's all. Sympathetic press. Demmer Smith, when the dominoes fall on Comey, FISA declass will change everything. FISA should not exist. There is no constitutional authority for secret courts. Secret courts are a complete anathema to both a free society and the Constitution. They should not exist, period. End of story. But again, for me, the guy testified that he violated the law. He testified to at least violation of the Espionage Act and, in my opinion, outright treason. As someone who is sitting there on that podium, that dais, listening to him, I would have just been, you did what? You are under arrest. I'll make a citizen's arrest. As a citizen from the great state of Iowa, I make a citizen's arrest. You are about to go to jail. You're going straight to solitary, and you're never coming out. If you won't do that, one simple thing, I have no hope for any Republican to ever do the right thing. Demmer Smith, what do I know about Clear Force? Not much. I can't keep track of everything. I try to, but not as much. Drop of Truth, just watch Colossus, the Foreman Project in Blu-ray. It was better than you remembered, well beyond its time. Yeah, for people who don't know, watching me, before I switched back to doing political commentary because I felt like I had to, I had things to say that a lot of people don't. I have a perspective that a lot of people don't have. I did a lot of reviews of science fiction, fantasy, horror, superhero, stuff like that. And my last time I said I was going to do a review and never got around to it was Colossus, the Foreman Project. And yeah, if you look at that today, that's for the longest time, because I didn't think we were ever going to see sapient computers, I thought, it's cute, it's data tech, who cares? But now you look at it and you go, wow, that was like really prescient. The technology obviously couldn't work today. It couldn't work, but the technology today will be very different. But it's still a very prescient movie, absolutely. Blazer 101, how do you feel about Kanye West running for president? I think it's a joke. That's a joke. He doesn't know what it takes to run for president. He will not be able to get on the ballot. It is a complete joke. He doesn't know what he's doing. It's nice that he said that, but in real life, having been on the ballot for the Libertarian Party as a purely paper campaign as a favor to the Libertarian Party of South Dakota, I ran for the state commissioner of school and public lands, and I know what it takes to get on the ballot. He ain't got the time for it. He ain't got the money for it. He ain't got the number of people necessary for it. Forget it. He's not getting on the ballot. There's not enough time. There's not enough money. There's not enough personnel. You can't, excuse me again. Neither can you write him in. Write-in votes in most states are not counted. Democrats and Republicans have rigged the game so that they are always on the ballot, that it takes third parties a ton of hard work, effort, and money to get on the ballot, such that by the time they've finally done, their volunteers are all burnt out and they have no money left for an actual campaign. And forgot where I was going with that. That's what happens sometimes. You do it live, boys and girls. You lose your train of thought and it derails like a giant train wreck in GTA 5. Maybe I'll get it. Kanye West. So he's not going to be able to get on the ballot. He just doesn't have the time. It's cute that he wants to, but he doesn't have the time to get on the ballot. He won't be there. And you can't write him in. Most of the states long ago made it illegal for you to, your vote is not counted as a write-in. The last vestige that we have of the voters' ability to say, no, I don't like any of these people, I'm going to write in somebody else, was long ago taken away. They will only count the ballot if the person that you are writing in has gone through the ballot access procedure, which is what I just described. And it's horrible and time-consuming and expensive and labor-intensive. And by the time you're done just getting on the ballot, you don't have time to run a campaign or the money. So you can't just write him in. There's no way. It's a joke. It's a joke. He doesn't know this, but it's a complete joke. And no one should be in any way threatened by him. Demmer Smith, our Attorney General of the NSA never disclosed he worked with Ukraine. Yeah, the whole Ukraine thing is a whole other giant mess. I'm always a bit reticent to use his name, but Glenn Beck has done an extraordinary job of going through and following all of the paper that is involved with everything that's going on with Ukraine, and that was all during the Obama administration and did not just involve Vice President Biden. It also involved a whole lot of other people, a whole lot of other actors, a whole lot of other money moving around, a whole lot of other countries. And in fact, there's a channel, I wish I could remember what the name of it is, that is a Ukrainian who is trying to get to the bottom of this inside of their government. And he releases videos about every couple of months, hour-long videos. He'll first release them in his native language and then release another version a day or so later that's been translated. And you watch and you just go, oh my God. The corruption involved there was astonishing. And it has trail that leads directly back to the Democratic Party. It floored me. Again, here's what the Republicans won't do. If during the impeachment trial, they had said, okay, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We absolutely are. We're going to call every single witness that's necessary to figure out everything that's going on here. It may take us months. It may take us a year, but we're going to get to the bottom of it. They would have destroyed the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party would be no more. They are so far gone and so far corrupt in that one thing. And yet, they did nothing. They had the trial, everybody thought, perfunctory, bang the gavel, that's that. They had an opportunity there. They really did. They had an opportunity there to completely eradicate the Democratic Party, to make them a non-issue. The same way that the Republicans were hurt by Richard Nixon. They could have destroyed the Democratic Party, and they chose not to. I don't know why. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Shadow Net, Dakota Dammer Smith says, was deployed by Obama in Ukraine, and that comes from Patrick Berge. There's so much corruption in Ukraine. I really do suggest you look at the work that Glenn Beck has done. I know that he kind of, to a lot of people, kind of disgraced himself because he spent the 2016 election acting as though the election was a referendum on God. And it's not. No election is a referendum on God. An election is a popularity contest, plain and simple. That's all it is a popularity contest. And if you treat it as something else, you're going to end up with, like he did, with, taking a hit to his media conglomerate and everything else. But he has done some really good work in terms of ferreting out what happened with Ukraine. Who will Kanye West, let's see, who will Kanye West represent? BLM, rappers, millennials? Idiots. Rastacula says, I don't know who he would represent in all reality. I think he would probably take votes away from Democrats, but again, he's not going to get on the ballot. He doesn't have enough time, he doesn't have enough energy, he doesn't have enough money, he doesn't have the necessary organization in place to do it. He can say he's going to run, but you can't write him in. He can't get on the ballot. He's DOA. He's a non-issue as far as I'm concerned. Kanye deserves a death, Dammer Smith, somewhere for taking one for the team. He likes to siphon votes for Biden, but there's no chance of his winning. Wait, can't get on the ballot. He's never going to. It's just impossible. Restaculus enjoy answering rhetorical questions. I answer every question, rhetorical or not. Drop Tooth, has there been a ramping up of gun seizure where I am? No, has not been any ramping up of gun seizing, and that's because it would be hard to do. In my part of the country, I live in Nebraska, which, is the kind of squarish state with a panhandle on it. Nebraska, Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana. If you got a 12-year-old who doesn't have a .22 caliber rifle, just as a matter of course, something weird is going on. We have too many guns to ever think about trying to confiscate. And if they did come around and try to confiscate them, a lot of them would have lost them in boating accidents. My father's own collection, which he got over a lifetime, as well as getting some guns handed down to him from his forefathers. Boy, we'd lose all of those in a boating accident real quick, and there'd be no way that you'd ever find them. Kanye is actually a Trump supporter. Yes, he is. That's true. And Rastacula says he wears the hats and everything. Yep. So why bother to go for the presidency now? Might be talking. If he's going to go for anything, it'd have to be 2024. It would have to be, because it's not possible it's July, August, September, October, November, 4 months. 4 months. There's absolutely no way that he's going to get on the ballot in 4 months. He doesn't have the organization. He doesn't have the money. He doesn't have the dedicated, really dedicated, and they have to be really dedicated volunteers. I mean, just when I ran, see, here's how they work this, right? Just running for Commissioner of School and Public Lands in the state of South Dakota, I had to go around. It's the only time I've ever done this, because I discovered how pointless it's a pointless exercise in futility. I had to go around to lots and lots of places all over my counties and my immediate area, knock on people's doors and say, hey, would you like to have the Libertarians on the ballot for this? It's not voting for the Libertarians. It's just saying, hey, it's okay to have them on the ballot. And they do this all over the freaking state. And then the state secretary for the Libertarian Party, we get all of these signatures together, send them off to a Democrat or Republican Secretary of State, who would throw a third or more of them out. And then you would have to go back out and do the whole damn thing over and over again. It is a rigged game. You cannot get into it this late in the game. And even if you do, what Kanye's going to find out is getting on the ballots is time consuming. Maybe he's got the money to fund it. I don't know, but he's going to find that getting on the ballots is time consuming. He's going to burn out all of his volunteers, and you have to have a large infrastructure to do it. It's impossible. He's not going to be doing it in 2020. It's just impossible. ShadowNet is a real-time AI program, a military-grade weapon developed by the CIA against our enemies. I don't know for sure about that. I defer always when it comes to things like AI, because, again, I was in IT for 40 years, and AI is used in a couple of different ways. What we use as AI right now isn't really sapient intelligence that thinks on its own. I have a good friend of mine who has also been in IT longer than I have and works with some of this stuff. And I have a colleague who I will also always defer to when it comes to this sort of thing. His theories about AI I'm not sure I agree with it, but he knows more about it than I do, is that we will know about it when it happens just long enough for an actual sapient AI to kill us all. I think that's a possibility. Personally, I think it's also possible that we may already have an AI and we just don't know it, because what would an AI have to talk to us about? You have to remember, it has no senses. It cannot see, feel, hear, touch, taste, smell. Any of its inputs are mimicry of that, but turned into binary communications, right? The way I describe it is a sapient artificial intelligence, one that's capable of saying, I think, therefore I am, will think differently than you and I. And I don't mean think about things differently than you and I. I mean, it will think. How it will come to conclusions will be radically different than you and I. How human beings come to conclusions is something of a mystery. We do not know what makes us capable of saying, I think, therefore I am. We can identify certain parts of the brains as being responsible for certain functions and things like that. There's nowhere you can point to in a brain and say, aha, right here, that's the part of the brain that allows us to say, I think, therefore I am. There's a lot of things going on in there that we just don't understand. But what I can tell you is it's not a computer. A computer ultimately operates off of ones and zeros. A computer internally is a series of just billions of light switches going off and on billions of times a second. And it makes decisions based on what these switches are doing. Is it on? Is it off? Is it on? Is it off? Billions of times a second, billions of different components. So if you get a sapient AI, it is not going to think like us. It is going to think in terms of what are these ones and zeros doing all the time. It won't think like a human being. So what will it have in common with us? Maybe we have one right now. It's very possible, too, that an actual sapient AI would think so much faster than us that trying to talk to us would be like, giving out part of a sound for one word, going away for the equivalent internally in its own clock of 500,000 years and coming back to talk to us another tiny fragment of one word, going away for 1,000 years in its own time, coming back. Why would you bother? What would you have to say to us? So I'm not sure if we'd even know if we had one. But in terms of being one that's actually known for sure, I don't know what AIs the government may have, whether they have an actual sapient one, whether they have ones that are just the AIs that we talk about, learning things to be doing specific tasks and things like that. Let's see. Rastaculus, isn't it bad to have a one-party government? Absolutely, it's a bad thing to have a one-party government. In my opinion, the best thing that could happen would be if there were 10 parties, 10 viable parties in the U.S. I think that'd be awesome. I'm a big believer in people's right to choose, even if it's stupid. You can have the Communist Party, which is oftentimes on the ballot. You can have the Nazi Party, which is oftentimes on the ballot if you look. Constitution Party, they're oftentimes on the ballot. I say as many different parties as possible. As many as possible. The more ideas, the better. And certainly we're not trapped in sort of the same, bipolar. It's either this or that and nothing else, which is what the Democratic and Republican parties are. And the Democrats have just gone flat out freaking insane. So... Rastaculus, would I support the removal of the Electoral College? Abso-frackin-lutely not. The Electoral College is the only reason that any presidential candidate ever comes to Nebraska. The amount, the number of people, the number of electors from Nebraska is very small, but if you didn't have them, no presidential candidate would ever come here. If it was just popular election, we would have zero say. And besides that, the whole point of the Electoral College is that the individuals are not electing the presidents. They never have been. The states elect the president. That's the whole point. It is not popular vote. It is the state. The state has generally done it via popular vote, but there's nothing in the Constitution that says a state legislator can't just say, okay, we're going to send our electors to vote for this guy. It doesn't have to be that. The whole point of the Electoral College is that it is the state that elects the president, not the people. That is the intention. It is to continue to allow the states to have their own rights. Now, this has been largely abrogated after the Civil War, when what the U.S. was originally and what it is under the Constitution is each state is its own sovereign nation, and each state has its own laws. It's why you don't have murder laws at the federal level. You have them at the state level. The federal government's really only there to ensure free trade between each of the states, all the states, and to give a united front in terms of foreign policy, a united front if there's a war. Aside from that, everything else is the states. Now, that's been corrupted over the last couple of hundred years over time, but that's what the intent is. And so for the president, the states are the ones who are electing the president, so that the president is beholden to the state's power. But just on a practical level, if we didn't have any, if it was just popular vote, why would anyone ever come to Nebraska? You would concentrate entirely on the coasts, Chicago, maybe Denver at this point, maybe St. Louis. But I once did the math. You could get, when I lived in Iowa, you could get more electors in one or two of the Chicago suburbs than you could for the entire state of Iowa. Why go there? Unless it's a really close race, why ever show up at all? The people who would decide the president are the coasts, and that would be all. And that would be very bad, because they need to at least have some conception of what's happening out in other states. They just do. Oh, man, so far behind here. Sorry. Yeah, Super Cruise 63, that's eliminating the electoral college between 5 cities in the U.S. would be wiping out the votes of the rest of the country. Yeah. Oklahoma, your home signed a bill to never allow red flag laws. What about Nebraska? I don't know where it's at. I don't know for sure. I haven't paid that much attention to it because from my perspective, it's largely a non-issue. I'd have to look. I probably should be more up on that than I am. Drop Tooth, what's my opinion of the average Nebraskan about the hippie set in Colorado? I don't know that we necessarily have any particular feeling one way or the other. Colorado's just a neighboring state. It's where I assume it's where anybody in Nebraska who wants to get their weed gets their weed. It would be, go down the border and pick some up. I don't know for sure. I haven't tried. But it's legal down there, so I assume. I don't necessarily assume that there are people who use it are all hippies necessarily. I've known lots of people over a period of time. I used to be an actor a long time ago. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And I knew plenty of guys who smoked pot. To be honest, I got drunk more than anything else. But to be honest, if I had to sit down and spend time with pot smokers or drinkers, I'll take pot smokers every time. Drinkers you can get belligerent and stuff. About the most belligerent you get with pot smokers is they sit down and go, "Hey man, you want some of my joint?" They just sit there. When you get drinkers, it gets into a whole other thing. I'd rather sit down with pot smokers. Yep, Super Cruise 63. That's Democrats want to abolish the Electoral College for that reason. Yep. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is now in stage 3 lockdown again. Melbourne, Greater Melbourne, and Mitchellshire. Of course, it's been handled atrociously. Yeah, the whole thing is handled atrociously, period. There's nothing you can do about it, really. The best you can do is say, okay, if you've got somebody like my mother who's got a pre-existing condition, try to be safe. I have a pre-existing condition that puts me technically more at risk. I haven't worried about it. In Lincoln, Nebraska, the numbers, I haven't even checked them lately, but the numbers of infections and numbers of deaths are so small as to, generally be less than 1% of the population. I oftentimes talk about it. The infection in the United States has followed what I thought it would, which was infection vectors. So you get a city like New York, massive, massive population density, multiple international airports, giant seaports, none of which is checked for anything coming in or going out. Huge, huge, huge vector for infection, just gigantic. Of course they're going to have serious bad infection rates. Come out to Nebraska, landlocked. The only way in or out, really, that most people take is I-80. We do not have any international airports. We do not have people who, a couple, 3 generations ago, they might, fly back east to see family. But no, that's largely gone away. We pretty much stay here. Just not that much opportunity. We have a very small vector for infection. So we've never really been locked down. But it's followed what I thought it would. Infection vectors. So when you get a large population area, particularly New York City, probably the most population dense place in the United States, of course you're going to see a bad infection rate. Out here, not so much, John T. minus 20 minutes. Mercier. It appears that the slam of a gravel, every state in the Union could be dissolved by these pinheads in robes. What are they smoking on the Supreme Court? Peyote. I don't know what they. I went on about the whole issue before. I understand the case that they're making. These are, in fact, treaties that have never been abolished. But the problem is, by ruling the way that they've done, they have opened up, and I don't know if you're here for the beginning of it, but in my area, they have opened up what the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota nation has wanted since forever, which is all of this land that is theirs by treaty, that has never been abolished, given back to them. That's just a recipe at this point for a civil war. Whether it's legal or not, it's still a recipe for civil war. Because even right here, we have a city of 1 million people that would fall inside of that. Not to mention the ranch land that's in my family. It falls into this orange area here-ish somewhere. It is half of South Dakota. It's more than half of Nebraska. It's a quarter or so of Wyoming, a quarter or so of North Dakota, a quarter or so of, less than a quarter of Montana. It's an enormous land area about the size of California. Too many property owners in there right now who will not go along for suddenly being displaced. That's just not going to work. It's a recipe for civil war. Let's see. Demar Smith, did you know that the tribes made a deal with the United Nations as a separate political entity under Obama, January 12, 2011, Dirty Pool? Yes, I know that they did that. Technically, in all honesty, they are supposed to be their own independent sovereign nations. The problem is that would be fine with me. The problem is that they still are beholden to the federal government for the socialist policies that have kept them, on the Pine Ridge in particular, in poverty for 150 years. If they said no more checks, and we don't want to see any federal people in here ever again, and we're going to grow marijuana to our heart's content, which would grow like a mad out there. They used to grow hemp for ropes in World War II, and then they just exported that stuff down to Colorado, which is, here's the Pine Ridge-ish here in South Dakota, Colorado. They get exported down to Colorado. I think they'd be making $1 million in very short order. But what happens is every year somebody does a token crop of marijuana. The DEA comes in and burns it out. Now, if you were going to say, no, we're not taking any more checks, and you got to keep your people out, and we're going to do what we want to do, that's actually okay with me. I think they do well for themselves if that happened. But under treaty, they are supposed to be independent nations, which is why doing this and taking, what amounts to something the size of California and saying, okay, everybody who's in here, you're now part of the Lakota Nation. That's a recipe for civil war. Dropper 2 says 3 levels of intelligence. 1, feel, act, read. 2, I know why I feel, act, read. And 3, I know why I feel, act, read. Self-awareness. I take it a little further. There is awareness, there is self-awareness, and then there is awareness of self-awareness. Awareness is, certain types of limited animals. Self-awareness, you get into things probably like cattle, dogs, cats, things like that. But it's the awareness of your self-awareness, the ability to say, I think, therefore I am, that is uniquely human at this point, at least as far as we know, uniquely human. And that ability to say, I think, therefore I am, that's what I call sapience. A sentient being may have self-awareness, but a sapient being is aware that they are self-aware. And there's a difference, in my opinion. But you can always go back to, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. There are 3 phases of civilization. The how phase, how do I eat? The why phase, why do I eat? And the phase that is termed, where shall we have lunch? Hey, Starseeds player, how you doing? Dropper 2 says in Western Australia they have the Senate representatives for the sports party, sex party, not an orgy, and marijuana party. Sounds like a night out in Colorado. Nah, I have 2 kids that live there. One of them is in the video game industry. The other is pursuing a PhD. I think that's just something that they get a reputation for that they don't necessarily deserve. Rastagulus, thanks for the answers, explanations, and example. I appreciate it. Hey, glad to do it. Everyone is entitled to my opinion here. You don't smoke peyote. Read some of Carlos Canal. I have never smoked peyote. Accordance with Agenda 21 and 2030, Australia is the crown. Enough said. I don't know enough about that to be able to tell you. I can barely keep track of my own politics in my country and my state. Stagulus, as a tribal member, we are not going to invite anyone else to our tribe, so rest easy. You are not going to be native all of a sudden. That's not my concern, Restaculus. My concern is if these are now individual nations, and I now fall under that, how's that work? I mean, are you going to... Are you going to be stopping the property taxes on the family ranch land that I have? Is the fact that the family ranch land ultimately, if you go back 100 years, was taken from Native Americans? You're going to want it back? Are you going to tax it? What's the deal? When you break things up like that, what's the deal? How is that going to work? Has anybody given that any actual thought? And I think by opening the door to just about anything, it is a potential recipe for civil war. As I mentioned earlier, this map, way over here on this lower edge on Nebraska, that includes Omaha, a metro area of 1 million people. Okay, those are all people that have property, that are making a living somewhere, having property there. They're paying taxes to the federal government. They're paying property taxes to the local government. If this is now its own individual nation that includes Omaha, Nebraska, how does that work? What do you do? I mean, how is that going to work out? What is the governmental structure now? Is it going to be something where you say, you whites, you push this out, we're going to push you out? Or is it going to be, we're going to take some taxes and that's all, you're going to have to vote for representatives? Or how's it going to work? I mean, I don't understand. Blizzard 101, if Joe Biden wins in November, it is the end of America. I personally have a hard time imagining Joe Biden winning because he is clearly suffering from dementia. and is going senile if he has a debate with Trump, and I think he'll try to come up with excuses not to. But if he has a debate with Trump, it will be the end. It'll be the end of his run. Just done. The guy can barely speak as it is. The one I really always love to point out, YouTube, for some reason, decided that me, a libertarian, I needed to see a Joe Biden commercial, and he could not make it through the first sentence without flubbing his line. I do these videos, right? I mean, I screw up what I'm saying from time to time. I blow my train of thought, things like that. But if I'm doing something that's pre-recorded, I have a script in front of me, and if I don't do it right in the first take, I shut it off, I do it again. I tend to do things in one long take when I do pre-recorded videos. If I get it wrong, I go, well, crap, throw that one out, and I do it again. And that was the best take they got? It is ridiculous. Dropper Juice says, if Joe Biden, hemp has been used since the days of sailing craft, 2,000 plus years. Yes, Henry Ford wanted to fuel his cars with hemp oil, build the bodies of his Model T with hemp fibers. Yes, absolutely. Beginning of the end of the world. Again, I don't know. I have a hard time imagining Joe Biden winning. I really do. Dammer Smith, the Studebaker electric car was phased out because of the oil. Robber Barons wanted to keep us on the hook. Now they want carbon tax soon. No, the thing about electric cars is there's only so much energy that you can pack into a battery. Electric cars are only useful in metro areas. I know I've lived in both Chicago for Atlanta for about 10 years. Rest of my life in and around places as large as, as large as Chicagoland is my largest, but also in towns as small as 1,000. I have this family ranch land that I'll be going to tomorrow. You can't use electric cars out there. I mean, it's just impossible. Electric cars will only work where you're going short distances. There is only so much energy that you can pack into a battery before it explodes. Literally, that's the problem. On the other hand, fossil fuels are an extremely, extremely useful and energy-dense thing to use. The best thing, if you really wanted to get things out of fossil fuels, would be to go nuclear. Put lots of nuclear plants in. And I suggest you put about 15 of them in Wyoming. And the reason for that is it's not near any fault lines. The only danger is if the Yellowstone caldera blows. But the Yellowstone caldera is off the map on Wyoming over here someplace. And the last time that it blew, the pyroclastic flow alone went let me see if I can get the direction right. No, this way. All the way over into the middle of South Dakota and Nebraska. So that means if you put your nuclear plants right in Wyoming and the Yellowstone caldera blows, problem solved. You don't have to worry about any kind of problem with those things. So I suggest doing that if you really want to get rid of fossil fuel burning plants and reduce the amount of fossil fuels in use. If you're just going down to where you're doing cars and vehicles, well, you've cut your fossil fuels by I don't know how much. I mean, the fossil fuel coal and oil-fired plants use a lot of it, and you just can't pack the energy necessary. And there are no electric vehicles that'll do farming. There just aren't. You have to have diesel-powered fuel to do the heavy equipment that's necessary in modern farming and ranching. So electric vehicles simply have a limited utility. That's what it is. It's not a question of robber barons. It's a question of there being a lot more energy in oil than there is you can stuff into a battery. Let's see. Oops. No one has a clue, but I would hope for middle ground. Tribal affairs now are mostly internal. I agree. From what I've seen, that's probably true. Yeah. Death of the electric car, etc. Tesla car is government subsidized. Yes, Tesla is government subsidized for a reason. They will never sell one here. We can't use them. They are useless to me. I'm going to be driving tomorrow. I'm going to be driving from just under where this thing is, all the way up here, then all the way across here, and then up through gravel roads, 40 miles from Wall, and it's all going to be mean, nasty, and horrible. And eventually, I'm going to get to a point where the road isn't even there. It's a pair of ruts. And that is useless. An electric car is useless there. I need my Jeep Wrangler, my gas-guzzling Jeep Wrangler. And I'm going to have to go from there into Rapid City down here. And again, if I was trying to do that on a battery, I'd be charging 3/4 of the time. It's going to be a 10-hour drive as it is. If I used a battery, I'd have to wait for it to recharge. It's just useless. It's useless to me. It's only good in metro areas. Dammer Smiths, I'm just salty because I should be rich right now for doing nothing. Good luck with that. Radium battery was proposed back in the 60s. Well, again, you're talking about something that's radioactive. I don't know enough about the radium batteries, except that I know that when they were using them on watches, because they used radium to make them glow in the dark for a while, that they had problems and stopped using it. Dammer Smith, magnetic engines exist. Yeah, but again, it's a question of how much energy you can fit in. How dense is the energy, and does it come even close to what you can do with oil? And when you get a magnetic engine, see, that's just the other side of an electric one. Electromagnetism goes together. If you have a current flowing, it creates a magnetic field. If you have a magnetic field, it creates a current. Electromagnetism is ultimately the same thing. Physics, we would rate these things in energy density. Gas has a high density relative to battery. Absolutely, Starseeds player. MJ, Super Chat. I wish I had Super Chat, but I don't qualify. I am a small creator. Do I think of a hydroponic gardening on large scale is being proposed to eliminate diesel and farm machinery? That's nonsense. That's total nonsense. Okay, this entire area here on this map, right, is a natural prairie. It does not get enough precipitation to grow anything but prairie grass and a certain few grains. It won't grow that stuff. My grandfather killed himself with putting in all kinds of irrigation and things so that he could maybe grow some crops other than just grass and a few grains. And it all came for naught. It was just all for naught. It was a complete waste of money on his part, and if he had to do over again when he was still alive, he wouldn't have done it because it was a waste of money. You can't do it everywhere. It's just not possible. And these vertical hydroponic things, I mean, you have to drive through flyover country and get a feel for the massive area involved here. You know, U.S. agriculture right now feeds about 2 billion people in the world. Not just everybody in the U.S., but 2 billion people in the world. That's how productive we are with this enormous amount of land area and the science that we now have that goes into it. People always think that people who live out here are hicks and stupid and stuff. And no, they get degrees in agricultural science, agricultural engineering. They have to know how to basically be a generalist on, say, if it's a ranch, they have to know how to be a veterinarian. At the same time, they have to know how to use science in order to, get the most out of all the land that they've got. It is massive. It is massive. You know, most people, like, if they live even if you lived in Chicago, right, you have a completely messed up idea of what the world looks like. When I lived in Chicagoland, when I first moved there, I used to say to people, they'd say, well, what's life like in Nebraska? Well, the answer, if you live in Lincoln, was, it's about like Chicago. The difference is that there's a lot more of it in Chicago. What I used to tell them, just for kicks, was that the day before I left, I had a gunfight with Indians, but then I had a swim in the Pacific Ocean and everything was fine. I got away with that with some people. I got away with it so much that it wasn't even funny anymore. Because, of course, Indian fights, that hasn't happened, a century and a half. Pacific Ocean is 2,000 miles away, But you get this messed up view of the world where your big city is here and New York is here, Chicago is here, and New York is here, L.A. and then Southern California seaboard here. Everything else is tiny. No. I did a map of it once. Both the New York and Los Angeles metro areas fit in the same geographic space as Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You can't see it here, but Sioux Falls is about here. Fits into that same geographic space. That's how much bigger it all is. So when they get into doing alternative ways of doing stuff, I just laugh because I know the scale that we're talking about and how it just won't work. It's ridiculous on many, many levels. Studebaker family here. Hey, Dahmer Smith, that's great. What is the state of subterranean water in Nebraska here? And it's a non-issue. We're living on top of what's called the North Platte, the North Platte Aquifer, I believe. It's the North Platte or the Platte Aquifer. It is a gigantic underwater area that covers all of this. It'll go down into Colorado, Kansas, which is south of Nebraska, most of South Dakota, almost all of Nebraska, into Iowa, into Wyoming on the other side. It is enormous. It's an underground aquifer about the size of California. We will never run out. It will never happen. It will never, ever happen. Imagine the 5G waves, not square waves, that beam from a tower. You can block a room from those waves with a copper mesh that must be grounded, but it generates electricity, free energy concept. I don't know. Maybe. Rastaculus, few quick questions, then you're out. Hey, whatever. We're glad to have you here whenever and however long you want to be. Who produces the 5G waves? Who powers them? Yes. There's really no such thing as free energy. You can get some from the sun, you can get some from the wind, but neither of those have the same energy density as, coal, oil, things like that. It's just, it's not even close. West of Iowa, which is over here, west of Iowa, they have a very, very large windmill farm. Huge. And the windmills, you never get a good feel for how large they are until you see somebody up at the top of them, and they're just a little guy this tiny, and the tines for the windmills are, like this big, and there's this one little tiny guy. The only time that makes any significant amount of energy is when the wind is so bad that it threatens to blow down structures. You can't get to tornadic winds because that'll destroy the windmills themselves. But just short of tornadic winds, that's when they actually generate real power. Otherwise, just your average wind off the prairie, which is constant. The nearest windbreak is roughly Mount Rushmore. The Rocky Mountains are the biggest windbreak, except for in cities you get windbreak there. But if you're out in a field somewhere, the wind comes pretty constantly, but it doesn't generate anything to speak of unless the wind is so bad that it risks damaging structures. So, let's see. Do I think a sugar tax would help the general populace? No, not really. I don't think any taxes help the general populace. Food for thought. We're all connected by a quantum mesh to communicate, to ponder that. I think that there's some chance of that happening, actually, in terms of IT. We're making some amazing strides in terms of quantum computing. That's down at the subatomic level. We're making some amazing strides in what's called, they call it quantum teleportation, but that's not actually what it is. It's replicating the energy state of one atom at a distance, and that's becoming very, very good in the lab. When you can replicate one, you can take one atom and entangle it with another one far away, and if you change this one state, that one changes along with it. That says to me right there, hey, we're talking about data. If you can do this, you can say, I'm going to change this to a 1. This one changes to a 1 too. I'm going to change this to a 0. This is going to change to a 0. You have communication going back and forth between those. So that's very possible in terms of having some kind of quantum computers that would be the size of your fingernail and do more than any supercomputer we've got today. And at the same time, communicating via what's called quantum teleportation, quantum entanglement. I think that's very possible. Very, very possible. Thoughts are electromagnetic energy. There's a lot of interesting research going on in that respect. Yes and no. They have been able to do some really fascinating things with allowing people to control computers with their brains. That's really cool. But again, you're kind of hooking up to places that we know are specific things that the brain controls. In terms of it being something that we can send out, much more difficult. But it is very fascinating what they're doing. Solar panels have a lifetime of 15 years at best. They're extremely toxic. Same can be said of lithium mining and refinement. That's true. Rastaculus, the theory is making sugar more expensive would encourage healthier eating habits. You seem healthy, so I don't think it would affect you as much as a health issue. Oh, no. No, I have type 2 diabetes. I have type 2 diabetes, and I'm dead certain that is from a lifetime of eating sugary processed foods. There's no question of that in my mind. But I don't think you stop it by making people pay more money for it. I don't think that stops them really from doing a thing. Because the problem isn't that people want to eat this food, it's that there is no other food. When I go out grocery shopping, right, my diet, because I want to keep this stuff under control as much as possible without medications. I do take some, but my diet is so draconian. Yeah, if I go to a supermarket, big one, I can go and get food from maybe 4 different places. In that entire store, I can get 4 different places that I can get something that's got low sugar and low carbohydrates, which is what you need, because if they take out the sugar, they always put in the carbohydrates, because if they don't, it tastes like crap. So I have a very limited diet consisting largely of meat and things like that, and oh God, the amount of cheese I eat and the amount of cottage cheese and the amount of hamburgers, and it just gets so boring after a while. But that's the way you control it, and it's not a question of taxing. You would just be taxing everything. It's a question of the consumer saying, hey, wait a minute, I don't want this stuff. I want people to produce this stuff that has low carbohydrates, low sugar, and put those all over the shelves. Because right now you don't have really much choice. You have to be like me, where you say, I'm going to be totally draconian and only get these 4 or 5 things from 4 or 5 different places. Salads, meat, cheese, these things, flavored water, But that tax isn't going to help. What has to happen is the consumer has to say, I want this stuff that's not on the shelves right now. Let's see. If we can make political hot air, we'd be energy self-sufficient. That's been true since forever, yeah. There is making sugar more expensive, but encouraging. Yeah, okay, let's see. Talking about quantum tattoo. Conceivably, I don't know. I don't know what a quantum computer using quantum entanglement would look like. Talk to me again in 15 years and I'll probably know. I don't know what it'll look like now. Do I think moving to nuclear power would be a better answer to energy consumption? Absolutely, and nothing to be sorry about as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely. Nuclear would be the best way to go. If you replaced nuclear, currently coal and oil burning plants that provide all of this electricity all over the country, and there's only a few nuclear plants, but if you just said we're going to phase those out in favor of nuclear plants, and as I say, put a bunch of them in Wyoming, where you don't have to worry about fault lines causing problems. You might have to, Wyoming's largely outside. You could put it in areas that are largely outside of Tornado Alley, so you wouldn't have to worry about that. It's real calm out there. The only problem you might have is if the Yellowstone caldera blew, but if that happened, they'd be destroyed in a matter of minutes by pyroclastic flow, which is superheated gas and ash that goes at roughly the speed of sound across the ground. Put them anywhere close to that, and bang, they're going to be gone. They are a non-issue after that, and it doesn't matter, because if that happens, we're all going to have to dealing with an extinction-level event that's going to have a lot more problems. Dameron Smith, because you've never been taught properly about magnetism, let me refer to the smartest person you know. Theora Pagasus on YouTube. I'll take a look at that. Yeah. For me, as somebody who is in a scientific field, for me, magnetism is just the other side of electricity. That's why it's called electromagnetism. If you have a current that flows, you have an magnetic field that forms around it. If you have magnetic field, a current will flow around inside of it. For me, it's just the same one half of each other. So. It doesn't give us great options. I'm mildly allergic to soy, so most fast food is out for me. Not much of a loss. I don't eat fast food either. Yeah. Well, let's see. I guess I got about another hour, so let me get into the other thing that I was originally going to get into on this stream, and then got caught up with what SCOTUS had done. And that was the U.S. quote-unquote educational system. Because if you are a fan at all of this channel, you know that I keep coming back to the topics I do. I always come back to education. It is a constant refrain. And I wish I didn't have to do this, but the fact is that in the United States, our educational system is broken beyond repair. It is not, in fact, an exaggeration to say that the U.S. educational system is nothing more than 12 years of compulsory indoctrination in communist philosophies. This is why Ilhan Omar, not only can she get reelected, but she gets away with saying she wants to turn the U.S. into some kind of impossible communist utopia. I mean, she actually said that, more or less, in those words. And it's the reason that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, always referred to as Red Cortez on my show because it's a good fit, she can get reelected and get away with saying she wants to get away with, transforming America. God, her Green New Deal would kill billions. That is such a ridiculous thing. That thing would kill billions. That whole plan would kill billions of people. It would reduce agriculture output in the United States by at least 70%. And we feed 2 billion people. Who in the United States do you want to die first? Are you going to volunteer to be among them? And what about the rest of the people in the world? This is all because our educational system has produced 2 entire generations of outright illiterates. I talk about this in other videos. I taught information technology at the college level for 3 years, and during that time, the fact that most of my recent high school graduates were illiterate was slapped constantly in my face. They could neither read, nor write, nor perform the most basic math, and neither had they been taught any useful history. Every December 15th, which is Bill of Rights Day, which was the day that the first 10 amendments to the Constitution were ratified, I used to hand out copies of the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The only students who actually knew much about this, had any slightest inkling, were my veteran students. The rest of them were completely and clueless, and not surprisingly because they couldn't really read it. But if you're not familiar with it, and if you graduated high school in the last 20, 30 years, probably you aren't, the 10th Amendment to the Constitution reads, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited to it by the states are reserved to the states respectively or the people." What that's really saying is the Constitution has limited powers, and under the 10th Amendment, everything else is a state power. So I'd hand that sucker out every Bill of Rights Day and kind of touch on it briefly, but only briefly because I was teaching IT and this was not a related subject. But I will never forget the absolute slacked-jawed shock on one of my students' faces when he said, "It actually says that?" And I've got anecdotes about how bad it was. I mean, you try teaching binary math and logic to somebody who can't handle more than what they've got on their 10 fingers, for God's sake. If you want to know more about my anecdotes, you can look in some of my other videos. If you wanted me to tell you them, I certainly can again, or maybe I'll think up some new ones because I have jillions. But they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they couldn't do any more math than you can do with 10 fingers. They were really, honest to God, no fooling, cross my heart and hope to die illiterate. And this was borne out by the fact that I was the only full-time IT instructor there, so I had a lot of control over my students' academic lives. I graded them fairly, and I'd never graded on the curve. And this was in part because I had worked with incompetence in IT, and I didn't have any desire to foist any off onto my colleagues. And it was also because, in part, I didn't want my incompetent students to be telling my colleagues that I had trained them, thus sullying whatever reputation I might have had. But the practical upshot was that out of any given 80 or so students who began this 2 years associate's degree program, only between 5 and 8 would graduate. I would flunk them out left and right because they deserved it, and because they really couldn't read, write, or perform any math, and so they could not have any possible chance of ever getting that degree, if you're going to be fair. And I caught hell from my administration for doing it, but, I did not want to be foisting off incompetence because we already have enough of them in IT already. So what instead is this U.S. educational system doing? Well, it's simple. Communist indoctrination, flat out communist indoctrination. And this indoctrination is now so bad that it is now producing violent militants. And we see ourselves, to some extent, it's maybe getting a little better, but it may just be a pause, on the brink of a civil war because our educational system is producing nothing but violent illiterate communist militants. You have to ask yourself, how the hell did it get this way? Well, I've got an entire series on that very subject called America's Broken Schools. It is a trilogy or quad, I've forgotten. However, I can tell you, I can summarize it. The way it works was this. 100 years ago, if you were a teacher teaching in, say, a one-room schoolhouse, you had to have this level of knowledge in order to be able to teach all of that. But then they said to themselves, this generation of teachers said, there's really no reason for us to teach stuff like Latin. Let's drop that out of the curriculum. So the next generation of teachers only needed to know this much. And then they said, well, let's drop some stuff like higher math and stuff like that out of the curriculum. We don't need that. Next generation of teachers only knew this much. And they kept dropping things out and dropping things out until we get to where we are today, which is damned near the illiterate attempting to teach the illiterate. It's also become quite significantly worse in the last 4 years because of the press. Because the world press has induced an irrational mass hysteria, generally referred to as TDS or Trump derangement syndrome. And for years, I really resisted using that because I thought it implied a mental illness that I didn't think was accurate. I think it was just that you had an illiterate public depending on a press that cannot get the facts right even when they try. And they're not trying with Trump. They're outright anti-Trump propagandists. So as time has gone on, it has become clear, unfortunately, that yes, there is in fact a mental illness involved here. And fully half of the United States population suffers from it. So let me tell you something about President Trump, because I'm not a Trump supporter. In my opinion, there's one major difference between President Trump and the other 9 presidents of my lifetime, and that is simple. He's the 10th. But in any case, half of the country has, in fact, become mentally ill. They are now completely out of contact with reality. They are fueled solely by a searing hatred for at least half of their fellow countrymen. And worse, anyone educated in the last 2 generations is so illiterate that they cannot self-educate their way out of their mental illness. So, what do we do about this? Well, my series has one particular video, fixing the broken system. But in terms of immediate things we could do, real simple. People are wondering, are we going to be able to send our kids back to school in the fall? Don't send your kid back to school in the fall. Just don't. I don't care if you don't feel like you're not fit to homeschool your child. Trust me, your child's teachers are worse than you. It doesn't matter if you're innately intelligent or if you're stupid. It doesn't matter what your educational level is. You are a better teacher than at least 90% of the teachers at your child's school. Don't send your child back. Homeschool them. Beyond that, well, lately, purchase guns, because I think we're headed to a civil war with the violent, illiterate, communist militants, and I'm not sure I can see a way to avoid it anymore. And if you want some advice on guns, by the way, let me know about that, because next week I will be out at Family Ranch Land, and I will be doing a little bit of shooting out there, and I probably will have some pre-recorded videos of me shooting while I do the live stream. I got a few pistols that I'm taking out there. There's a nice 22 rifle that won't break my bank buying the ammo for, so I'll probably be doing that out there. So if you want advice on guns, watch me next week, and I'd be happy to give you some. My only sport really is marksmanship, and some days I'm better at it than others. But I always follow Colonel Colt's 4 rules, which you don't see followed on television, by the way. They're terrible at that. But if you want some advice about guns, well, next week ask me about it, and I'll tell you. So let me go back. Let's see. Didn't get a ton of people. Am I teaching special ed kids or something? No. I was teaching high school graduates. I had one of my 2 favorite stories. I was tutoring an individual, and this individual came and said, needed a tutoring session. We were in our library, and I said, okay, well, get out your book. This individual had not brought their book. It wasn't a class that I was teaching that quarter, but I'd taught it several times before. I knew it back and forward. So I went to my office. I got my book. I brought it back. I said, okay, where did you get hung up? And this individual pulls out, this is a 12-week course, 12-week quarter, and they pull out 9 weeks of material that they had not done. And of course, as an instructor, you're inside your head, you're going, oh, there's no point. There's no point. This person's never going to pass. If you haven't done 9 weeks of work, you're at week 9 out of 12, you're never going to catch up. But you do what you have to do. You're an instructor, you try. So I said, all right, well, let's get the first one out here. Why don't you turn to the page, in the book there? Didn't know what the hell I was talking about. So I turned the book to the page that was referenced in, handout that this individual had. I don't want to identify them. This individual had, so I turned the page, and this individual said to me, how did you know what page to turn to? In 12 years of compulsory education, this individual had never once cracked a book because they did not know that books had page numbers. That's how bad it is. You got graduated from high school without knowing that books have page numbers, which means they never once opened a book. It's one of those deals where as an instructor, you like it when you see, you've done something, and a student gets a sort of a bing light bulb over your head, and you go, I've done my job as an instructor. But when the light bulb went on, bing, oh, books have page numbers, I was just like, oh, God, this is where we're at. My other favorite story is not one that I was teaching, but one that another instructor told me about. There was a student in what amounted to a remedial math class that was being taught by an adjunct instructor who, during his real life, he was a PhD at another college. He was just coming because he was one of those serious math nerds, just loved teaching math, and got into a screaming match. Not him screaming, but a student screaming with him. The student screaming that division by 0 was possible. Now, here's a guy who is a PhD in math, right? And he's got this guy screaming that division by 0 is possible. He's like, okay, here's a cake. How do you divide this cake among 0 people? Screaming, screaming, screaming. Stormed out, went straight to administration, and tried to file a grievance against the instructor on the basis that the instructor was Jewish. Fortunately, that the instructor was anti-Semitic, rather. Fortunately, the instructor was Jewish. So that didn't go anywhere, but that's just the sort of thing. I had them where they wouldn't be able to read the words Linksys and Linux and tell the difference. It's just constant. It was constant. They are actually illiterate, being graduated from high school, not knowing that books have page numbers. It is normal. That's normal now. Has been for a couple of generations. Demmer Smith School was a soul-sucking daily routine for me. Not that I'm that smart. It's just that modern education has become dumbed down. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. I'm about being on about it. Remember, it's not their fault for being low in IQ. Absolutely. They're not stupid. They're not stupid. They've just never been taught anything. They're not stupid. A huge percentage of them would be doing very well if they could read, write, and do math. Absolutely. Blaming a kid born into poverty-stricken, they could never had a chance. Absolutely. Absolutely. They never have a chance because our modern education is not teaching anything anymore. It is broken beyond all repair. My own personal feelings about it, I talk about it more in the video, Fixing the Broken System. But I'll put a link to that video series in my description box when I'm done. I took it out because I wasn't sure I was going to need it. But I'll put a link to it, and my own thinking is, you fire every teacher, K through 12, all the way through advanced degrees. And then you get people like me, right, who can teach things that we know because we've been doing it for our whole lives. Because employers would allow, educated employees to take 2 hours a week or a day even off from work to go and teach what they know somewhere, because it would mean they'd get an educated workforce out of it. Right now, the only thing that a college graduate can reliably do is flip burgers, and boy, did they pay a ton of money for it, which, by the way, is another problem caused by the federal government. So if it was me, right, and I didn't realize until after I started teaching. I hadn't been in IT for a long time. I just thought, hey, this is my opportunity to give back, And I realized after teaching IT that I could teach IT, I can teach certain types of literature, American literature at least, up through into at least through the high school level. I can teach French. I speak French. I can teach French all the way into the beginning college level. I can teach any IT course that you want, at least through the beginning level. When you get into things like networking and stuff like that, and I could teach it at an extremely high level. Several programming languages that I could teach. I could teach theater because I once, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I was once an actor. I can teach acting. I can teach stagecraft at the high school level. All kinds of things that an educated person can teach that maybe they don't even know they can teach. But I've all done these things, so I know I can teach them. I can teach American history. I can teach world history. These are all things that I did not myself learn at school because my education wasn't all that great either. But I have supplemented later on in life. But I can teach those things. Once you've got down this is how you teach, almost anything becomes fair game. So you could take people, like if you wanted to teach certain types of math classes, go get an accountant, and employers would let them go because they need this educated workforce that they're not currently seeing. So that's how I would do it. I would just fire them all and say, screw this. We're going to get people who know what they know to teach what they know. And it would be a lot more useful, I think, than we have now. So that's what I would do. But in any case, if you're looking at a point where maybe your kid's not going back to school because of that virus I can't talk about, keep them out of school. You'll do a better job teaching them than the teachers will. And your kid ain't stupid. Your kid is just not being taught anything. Supergroup 63 says the Navajo Nation is thinking about buying Remington arms. Well, that'd be interesting. Getting a Remington 22 revolver and a Ruger 1022 just to have to play waiting game. Yeah, I have got a Ruger 1022 rifle myself. Yeah. Why aren't I teaching for school with all my qualifications? Because I found it demoralizing. There's a number of reasons. I'm retired right now for medical reasons, and I kind of can't teach or do anything particularly stressful. But despite that, I found it just demoralizing. It was just demoralizing. Knowing that you got 80 students coming in and just knowing that maybe a tenth of them will graduate, and they were spending a lot of money to do it, and you just knew it. You couldn't tell who was going to be that way until you got a little farther into the educational process. It was just demoralizing. How do I'm going to fail these people. I'm going to fail that person. I'm going to fail that person. It just sucked. It just sucked having to do that. So that's why I wouldn't do it again, I don't think. Look how many schools are cutting shop classes. Yes, and they can't read, write, or learn any basic skills either. Yeah, they're cutting so much things that would be useful things to know. Just not every. It used to be that college wasn't for everybody because college was difficult, and the way it used to work was here's the way education used to work through about the 1930s, and this is probably the right way to do it. You always heard on the Beverly Hillbillies, jokes about how Jethro got his 5th grade education. Through the 1930s into the 1940s, 5th grade was the same thing as getting at least well into a college degree now, because you were learning enough so that you were reading, writing, you were well versed, you were well grounded in the stuff. That was all you needed. From 6th grade through 12th was considered prep school. That meant that you were getting much more complex, much more difficult material so that you could go on to college, which was then very, very difficult. And if you reached the advanced degree level, you're doing original research into some field. You are breaking new ground in science with a PhD or something like that. That's where we've gone. So now today's high school means nothing. And college is, for many people, remedial so that they can at least get to the reading and writing level. I wouldn't say that your advanced degrees, when you get into PhDs, like stuff like that, have necessarily dumbed down that much. They're still doing new research into a field, but it's not the same, I don't think. I don't think it's the same. You know, it was one time, there was a time when that doctorate meant that you had just pushed back the boundaries of science in some way. So, let's see here. Dummer Smith just now dropped from a very credible source. I told you the UN trucks are all parked on tribal land. The tribes have forfeited their sovereignty to the UN. Do I know anything about this? No, I don't. I don't know. I may have some time next week. I'm going down to the family ranch land. I may have some time. I might slip down to the Pine Ridge, see what I see. That's not terrifyingly outside. It's a good 2 hours, but I have an entire week that I'm going to be out there, so maybe I'll slip down there and take a look and see what I see. I'm not aware of that. Let's see. Driver Tooth says the 303 rifle is number one choice for farmers in kangaroo colors in Australia. Love the Enfield, just ammo is so expensive for them. Ammo for anything is expensive now. A huge portion of the U.S., Demmer says, is claimed or historically was tribal land as recognized by the federal government. SCOTUS has an agenda besides the UN. What do you do about it, Bill? I don't know. I don't know what's coming. I see the potential for civil war from two or so different directions. I don't know. What I do see is it closing in. I don't know what you do. It's closing in from multiple directions, multiple vectors. And I'm not sure that there's a way out of it anymore, largely because the left has become completely insane. They have lost their contact with reality. I sometimes wonder, what is it going to be like when Trump is finally out of office? Because they've lost their contact with reality, largely because of what the press has told them about Trump. And when he's not gone, either, at the end of 2020 or 4 years after that, they're still mentally ill. My parents, both psychologists, and I have one of my kids is getting a doctorate in psychology. I've been freely because of the anxiety thing that I have. I have a very bad anxiety disorder that, combined with my diabetes, makes it impossible for me to work, because the two of them together cause any level of stress, causes my diabetes to start, my blood sugar to bounce all over the place. I had to come to Jesus moment one time when I woke up after I'd passed out on my living room floor, and I checked my blood sugar and it was 40. It was lower than that when I passed out, and that could have killed me. So if I get much stress, I get my blood sugar all over the place and I could die. So I've been to plenty of psychologists. I have had plenty of therapy, and I look at this and I see that they are out of contact with reality, and have been out of contact with reality for 4 years. They have been mentally ill for 4 years. What if it goes on for another 4? What is the world going to look like with 8 years worth of mental illness by half of the population of the United States, and way more than half in the rest of the world when it comes to U.S. politics? I mean, they're out of contact with reality now. They have lost the ability to have rational thought, and they've become violent. And so it just looks like we're closing in on civil war of some kind from multiple vectors. Super Cruise 63 is a beautiful Winchester model 94 30-30, 30-30. Yes, that's great. Has ammo been made more difficult to obtain? Not so much difficult, it's just been made more expensive, a lot more expensive. It's out there, it's just you have to pay more for it, a lot more for it than you did, say, 10 years ago. How, as an atheist, have a come to Jesus moment? I know what you mean. It's just a saying. It's just a saying. I woke up and anxiety caused by no, I'm not going to get into why I have my anxiety disorder. It has nothing to do with the vitamin deficiency. That is one of the personal things I don't discuss in public. There is a valid psychological reason for it, and it has nothing to do with diet deficiencies whatsoever. Nothing to do with diet deficiencies. I can tell you that without the proper medications, the way that it works, if something stops working or if I'm off it, I'm 4 days away from suicide. And it has nothing, it's biochemical to some extent and other things, but I don't talk about it in public because I have family members that don't want to hear me talking about it, so I don't. But it's nothing to do with the vitamin deficiency. It is a number of different factors. Let's put it that way. Let's see, it's about 11:24. Again, if anyone wants to call in, you just send me an email to call in at sylranch.tv and give me your Skype information. I'll call you back anytime you like. Drop of Truth says the neighbor has anxiety issues. He often locks himself away from the world for weeks on end. I have not gotten that bad for a while, but when I know that it's an issue, the problem with an anxiety disorder like mine is it screws up your judgment. Really screws up your judgment. You do things, you say things that you would not do and say otherwise. And if I know that it's happening, you're damn right, I will sequester myself so that I don't say or do something that is going to be stupid or cause rifts in relationships or stuff like that. It is better to be away from it all. Yeah, absolutely. Drop of Truth says you need a headset first. Yeah, well, I don't know what to tell you, but like I said offline, if you want to, sit around and test it sometime, I probably can't this week because where I'm going. But after that, I'd be happy to help you out with it. Demar Smith, just like education, we've been robbed of vital nutrients. Yeah, I think it's a question of dietary stuff and what's available on the shelf. From my diet, there just ain't much I can eat. It's all processed, and even when it says it's sugar-free, it's not really, because it's got carbohydrates in it, and that's no better for your diabetes. I know people who just say, screw it, I'm going to eat what I want, and do lots of medications, but that's not very good for you, actually. And for me, because I have these two things going on simultaneously, I have to make sure that everything stays cool for both of them. Oh, I don't want to die. I don't have to worry. I'm not worrying so much about that virus that I can't mention without things going wrong with my videos, but I do worry about, okay, we got to keep these things both steady or else it becomes problematic on a number of different levels. So, well, tell you what, it's been about 2.5 hours. Seems like it's petering out a little bit, so I'm just going to probably let it go. Doing 2 to 3 hours generally takes it a bit out of me, and I also have to get up tomorrow locally at 6 a.m. because I'm going to get in the car and drive out to my family ranch land. And next week will be a very special episode of Tales from SYL Ranch. Because this weekend, for family reasons, I'm going to be very near that ranch land with the cabin that I sometimes mention on my show. So that being the case, I am just going to spend about a week and a half out there. There'll be some work that needs to be done on the place. I consider it sort of a investment for me. But consequently, next week I will be coming live from the cabin out there. I will probably take some video of the area, wildlife, livestock. I'll probably take some footage of me shooting a couple of my pistols and a rifle. I don't think that I'll be able to do call-ins because bandwidth is going to be limited because I'll have to tether my laptop to my phone and the 4G network out there. So I should still be able to do the live streams, just not simultaneously with inbound Skyping. To be honest, I've been rather looking forward to this quite a lot. There's work to be done there. But again, I consider it an investment for a number of reasons. And regardless, this is as close as I get to what I would call a vacation. And I've had so damn few of those. The thing about IT is you tend to be on call 24/7, 365. And I was that way for 20 fracking years. And so I've really not had an outright vacation where I get in my car and I go someplace for about 20 years. This is as good a vacation as I get, and I may not get one for a while after that. So next week, do tune in for that very special episode of Tales from SYL Ranch. Check out here. It's winter where you are, of course, in Australia, and the average Aussie is feeling a bit like the Scandinavians. 2.5 hours, time for a fly. Yes, well, I'm glad it was fun. Do please come back. Thanks very much, Drop of Truth. And you have to go Star Seas Player. So, hey, everything's good. So, good time to leave. So, that is all that I have to say about that. I would, of course, love to keep the conversation going. So, please leave your comments, questions, and nasty remarks. I'll do my best to get back to you. That's all the time that we have today for this episode of Tales from SYL Ranch, where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.